Number 1, Dorothy Stratten. In the golden era of Hollywood, there was an unspoken rule: fame demands a sacrifice. We look back at the late 1970s through a lens of nostalgia, the glamour of the Playboy mansion, the bright lights of the Sunset Strip, and the promise that anyone could become a star. But beneath the glitter, there was a predatory darkness waiting to consume the innocent. Our first case is perhaps the most heartbreaking example of this reality. It is the story of a girl who was compared to Marilyn Monroe, not just for her beauty, but for her tragedy. She was the girl next door, who was destroyed by the very man who claimed to discover her. Our investigation takes us back to Vancouver, Canada, in 1978. Dorothy Stratten was just a teenager working behind the counter at a Dairy Queen. She wasn't looking for fame, she was shy, naive, and possessed a natural, breathtaking beauty that stopped people in their tracks. It was there that she met Paul Snider. Paul was a local hustler, a small-time promoter with cheap suits and expensive dreams. He was 10 years her senior, a man desperate to be somebody. When he saw Dorothy, he didn't see a young woman, he saw his ticket to the high life. Paul groomed her. He convinced this shy girl that she was destined for greatness. He persuaded her to pose for photos, and eventually, he sent those photos to Hugh Hefner in Los Angeles. It worked. Dorothy was flown to the Playboy mansion, and her rise was meteoric. She became the Playmate of the Year. She began landing roles in major films. She was gentle, kind, and beloved by everyone who met her. But as Dorothy ascended into the stratosphere of Hollywood royalty, Paul Snider was left behind in the dirt. At parties, the divide was painful. Dorothy was the star, Paul was the embarrassing hanger-on. The Hollywood elite, directors, actors, and producers, saw Paul for what he was, a pimp living off his wife's success. He was humiliated. And for a narcissist like Paul Snider, humiliation is a dangerous fuel. Dorothy eventually fell in love with director Peter Bogdanovich, finding the kindness she never got from Paul. She asked for a divorce. She wanted to be free. But Paul Snider had a twisted philosophy: I made you, and if I can't have you, no one will. The tragedy unfolded on August 14, 1980. It was a warm summer day in West Los Angeles. Dorothy, with her entire life ahead of her, made a fatal error in judgment born of her own kindness. She agreed to meet Paul one last time at the house they used to share. Her goal was to negotiate a financial settlement for the divorce. She wanted to give him money, to make sure he would be okay. Her friends begged her not to go. They saw the darkness in Paul's eyes that Dorothy was too gentle to acknowledge. She walked into that house at noon. She never walked out. Inside, Paul Snider had prepared a scene of absolute horror. This was not a spur-of-the-moment argument, this was a calculated execution. He was armed with a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun. The details of what occurred in that room are harrowing. Paul bound Dorothy, stripping her of her dignity and her freedom. He assaulted her, a final, desperate act of possession to prove that she still belonged to him. And then, he looked at the face that had captivated the world, and he pulled the trigger. The blast was devastating. In a split second, the angel of Playboy was gone. But the horror did not end with her death. Paul Snider remained in the room with her body for over an hour. The police report details a scene of madness that suggests he was trying to create a final, macabre tableau. Eventually, he turned the shotgun on himself. When the police finally broke down the door later that night, they found a scene so gruesome that hardened detectives were visibly shaken. The fairy tale had ended in a bloodbath.
The murder of Dorothy Stratten shangt het Hollywood voorver. Het satire te illusion of de Playboy 3. Het bekame te subject of de filmstar 80 aan het servet as alwake op val about te dangers of domestic abuse, even in te liefes of te rich and famous. Dorothy was 20 years old. Sy had barelei begin toeliewe. Dis kase resonate so diep bly witte is toe die bekose het is as story of stolen potentiaal. We wil nie verknop wat Mofie se wildhaven made, or te woman se wildhaven bekome. Sy is frozen intieme as a victim of a mans fragiele ego. This brings us to a difficult question, one that has been debated since 1980. Paul Snyder was clearly a disturbed individual, but manne argue that the sultire of the team, which treated young women as disposable commodities, enablet him. Though I think the entertainment industry of the 80s bear some responsibility for failing to protect vulnerable young stars like Dorothy. Or was this simply the act of a lone monster that no one veldhaven predicted? It like to hear our perspective in the comments. Dorothy Stratten was killed by the man se tried to help. But in our net case, we travel to Mexico City to witness a crime that soke te laten word. A legendary singer, a powerful 79-year-old lawyer, and a public execution in a luxury restaurant that profit no one is safe from a jealous partner. Subscribe and verify our notifications are on because if not, we investigate the assassination of Yrma Lydya.
Number 2, Yrma Lydya. In the circles of high society, there is a dangerous illusion that wealth buys safety. We are told that if you have status, connections, and money, you are insulated from the brutality of the world. We imagine that domestic violence is something that happens behind closed doors in broken neighborhoods, not under the crystal chandeliers of exclusive restaurants. But our next case shatters that myth completely. It proves that a predator in a bespoke suit is still a predator, and that sometimes, the most dangerous place a woman can be is sitting across the table from a powerful man who feels his control slipping away. Our investigation moves from the hills of Hollywood to the vibrant, chaotic heart of Mexico City. The date is June 23, 2022. Yrma Lydya was a rising star, a 21-year-old singer with a voice that carried the deep, soulful traditions of Mexican folklore. She was talented, charismatic, and possessed a beauty that turned heads. To the public, she was a young woman with the world at her feet. But in her private life, she was trapped in a gilded cage. She was married to Jesus Hernandez Alcocer. He was 79 years old, a staggering 58 years her senior. Jesus was not just an older husband, he was a man of immense, shadowy influence. A lawyer with deep connections to the political and judicial systems, he was accustomed to operating above the law. He was known to carry a gold-plated pistol, a symbol of his arrogance and his belief that he was untouchable. Friends whispered about the darkness in their marriage, the jealousy, the control, and the violence. Yrma had reportedly reached her breaking point. She wanted a divorce. She wanted her life back. On that fateful Thursday evening, Yrma agreed to meet Jesus at the Suntory restaurant in the upscale Del Valle neighborhood. It is a place of quiet luxury, known for its private rooms and high-profile clientele. Yrma likely chose this public venue for a specific reason. She believed that surrounded by witnesses, waiters, and security, she would be safe. She thought the presence of the public would force him to behave. It was a calculation that cost her her life. The dinner began quietly in a private booth, but the tension was thick enough to be felt by the staff. Witnesses later described a heated discussion. Yrma was trying to negotiate the terms of their separation. She was trying to leave a man who did not understand the word no. But for a man like Jesus Hernandez Alcocer, a woman asserting her independence is not a breakup, it is an insult to his authority. In a moment that froze the blood of everyone in the restaurant, the argument stopped. Jesus didn't call for the check. He didn't storm out in a rage. He simply reached for the gun he carried with impunity. In the middle of a crowded luxury restaurant, surrounded by the elite of Mexico City, the 79-year-old lawyer fired 3 shots. The first 2 struck Yrma in the chest. The third, a final act of execution, was aimed at her head. The sound shattered the polite atmosphere of the restaurant. Diners screamed and ducked under tables. Yrma Lydya, the young star with the golden voice, slumped over the white tablecloth. The brutality was shocking, but the killer's reaction was even more chilling. Jesus didn't run. He didn't panic. He sat there, composed, as if he expected his status to protect him even from murder. He and his bodyguard reportedly tried to leave moments later, but the sheer brazenness of the crime meant there was no escape this time. Police arrived and arrested the elderly lawyer, his hands stained with the blood of his young wife.
The murder of Yrma Lydya seensokwaarverstrouge met Chico. It became a grim symbol of the crisis of femicide, the targeted killing of women by their partners. The image of a powerful, elderly man executing his talented young wife in a public space posit the terrifying reality of impunity. It so wet dat voor sommige men, a wife is considered property, and property cannot be allowed to walk away. Justice in this case wordt bediend by biologie. In Oktober 2022, just months after the murder, Jes Hernandez Alcocer died in prison while awaiting trial. Het toek is secrets toe te graven, is stopping an official verdict from a jette. But the verdict from the public was unanimous. Hij was at the rand wo he said his power to destroy the only thing he felt in control. This task forces is to reconsider the advice often given to victims of abuse, leave him in a public plate. Yrma followed that advice perfectly, and it didn't so far. Tis liats me to a question event out to consider, to how believe tere is unuiterlei save way to leave a powerful, abusive partner, or is the moment of the partiere always a gamle witte diet. It appreciate reading our tougets on this difficult reality in the comments. Yrma Lydya was killed because ze tried to befree. But in our net case we return to the nostalgia of the 1980s. We investigate the tragic death of a young Hollywood princess who starred in the horror classic Poltergeist. Ze survived the ghosts on screen but ze couldn't survive the monster waiting in her overdreven way. Subscribe and verify our notifications are on because if not, we investigate the heartbreaking murder of Dominique Dunne.
Number 3, Dominique Dunne. In the folklore of Hollywood, there is a dark legend known as the Poltergeist curse. For decades, fans have whispered about the cast members of the classic 1982 horror film dying young and in tragic circumstances. They blame supernatural forces, ghosts, and bad luck. But for the young star of that film, the horror wasn't supernatural. It wasn't a ghost that haunted her, it was a man. We often use myths to explain away tragedy because the truth is too painful to face. The truth is that the monster wasn't under the bed or inside the television screen. The monster was standing in her kitchen, making dinner, and slowly tightening his grip around her life. Our investigation takes us to the privileged enclave of West Hollywood in the early 1980s. Dominique Dunne was 22 years old, a young woman with a pedigree as impressive as her talent. She was the daughter of Dominique Dunne, a famous producer and writer, and she was on the brink of superstardom after her role as the eldest daughter in Poltergeist. She had a bright smile, a gentle spirit, and a future that seemed limitless. But behind the bright lights, Dominique was living in a shadow. She had fallen in love with a man named John Thomas Sweeney. Sweeney wasn't an actor, he was the head chef at Ma Maison, one of the most exclusive and trendy restaurants in Los Angeles at the time. To the outside world, he was charismatic and talented. But behind closed doors, he was a ticking time bomb of insecurity and rage. Their relationship was a textbook cycle of abuse. Sweeney was possessive. He isolated her from her famous friends. There were incidents of physical violence, he had pulled clumps of her hair out, he had choked her before. Dominique, terrified but determined, finally found the strength to end it. She broke up with him. She changed the locks on her house on Rangeley Avenue. She was ready to move on. But John Thomas Sweeney wasn't ready to let go. The nightmare unfolded on the evening of October 30, 1982. Dominique was at her home, rehearsing for a new role with a fellow actor, David Packer. It was supposed to be a safe night of work and creativity. But then, John Thomas Sweeney showed up at the door. He demanded to speak to her. Dominique, perhaps trying to de-escalate the situation or fearing a scene in front of her guest, agreed to step out onto the driveway to talk to him. David Packer remained inside. He later testified that he heard shouting, followed by a sickening thud, and then, absolute silence. Out on the driveway, hidden from the streetlights by the high hedges, the talk had turned into an execution. Sweeney didn't use a weapon. He used his hands. He grabbed Dominique by the neck and squeezed. Strangulation is a deeply personal and intimate way to kill. It requires time. It requires sustained effort. For 4 to 6 minutes, an eternity in real time, Sweeney held his grip, watching the life drain out of the woman he claimed to love. When David Packer finally walked out, sensing something was wrong, he found Sweeney kneeling over Dominique's unconscious body. Sweeney looked up and simply said, "I killed my girlfriend." He didn't flee. He waited for the police, reportedly telling them, "I just exploded." Dominique was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She was in a deep coma, her brain deprived of oxygen for too long. For 5 agonizing days, her family, her father, her mother, her brother Griffin, sat by her bedside, praying for a miracle that would never come. On November 4, 1982, Dominique Dunne was removed from life support. She was dead at 22. If the murder was a tragedy, the trial was a travesty. John Thomas Sweeney was charged with murder, but his defense team painted a picture of a crime of passion. They argued that he didn't plan it, that he simply snapped in the heat of the moment. They blamed his rage on a difficult childhood and claimed he was a victim of his own emotions. The jury bought it. In a verdict that outraged the Dunne family and the Hollywood community, Sweeney was acquitted of second-degree murder. Instead, he was convicted of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. The judge sentenced him to 6.5 years, but in a final insult to Dominique's memory, he served only 3.5 years in prison. He was released in 1986. A man who strangled a woman for 5 minutes was free to walk the streets again in less time than it takes to get a college degree. Dominique's father, Dominique Dunne, channeled his grief and fury into becoming one of the most famous crime writers in the world, dedicating his life to exposing the injustices of the legal system. He ensured that even though Sweeney was free, he would never be forgotten as a killer. This case forces us to confront the legal definition of passion. The law often treats crimes committed in the heat of the moment more leniently than planned murders. This leads me to the question I want you to answer: do you believe that snapping or losing control in an argument should be a valid defense that reduces a murder sentence? Or is the act of strangulation, which takes minutes to complete, proof enough of intent to kill? I want to read your verdict on this controversial trial in the comments below. Dominique Dunne was killed by a chef who claimed he loved her. But in our next case, we fast forward to the modern era of social media. We investigate a shocking murder-suicide involving a VH1 star, a famous rapper, and a FaceTime call to Floyd Mayweather that witnessed the tragedy unfold live. Subscribe and verify your notifications are on, because up next, we investigate the death of Stephanie Moseley. Number 4, Stephanie Moseley. In the 21st century, the nature of fame has shifted. It is no longer just about talent on a screen, it is about constant visibility. We live in an era where relationships are curated, filtered, and broadcast to the world as perfect fairy tales. But the screen of a smartphone is a mirror that often distorts reality. Behind the likes and the comments, the old demons of human nature, insecurity, possession, and rage, still thrive. When you mix these volatile emotions with the high-pressure environment of the hip-hop industry, the result can be catastrophic. Our next case is a modern Hollywood tragedy, a murder-suicide that didn't just happen in private, but was witnessed digitally by one of the most famous athletes on the planet. Our investigation takes us to the upscale Park La Brea apartment complex in Los Angeles, December 2014. Stephanie Moseley was 30 years old, a woman who had fought her way from Vancouver to the center of the spotlight. She was a dynamic talent, a professional dancer who had toured with Britney Spears and Chris Brown, and a breakout actress starring in the hit VH1 series Hit the Floor. She was beautiful, vibrant, and her career was on a steep upward trajectory. Her husband was Earl Hayes, a rapper signed to Floyd Mayweather's The Money Team. But while Stephanie's star was rising, Earl's career was stalling. He was known less for his music and more for his proximity to greatness. This dynamic created a dangerous friction in their marriage. Friends described Earl as paranoid and deeply controlling. He was consumed by the suspicion that his wife was unfaithful. Industry rumors whispered about an affair with R&B superstar Trey Songz. Whether the rumors were true or false didn't matter to Earl Hayes. In his mind, the betrayal was real, and his humiliation was unbearable. The morning of December 8, 2014, began with a digital confession that haunts the history of celebrity crime. Earl Hayes made a video call. He didn't call the police. He didn't call a priest. He FaceTimed his best friend and boss, boxing legend Floyd Mayweather. What happened on that call is a matter of public record and private horror. Earl was agitated, pacing in his apartment, telling the champ that he couldn't take it anymore. He told Mayweather that he was going to kill his wife. Mayweather, realizing the gravity of the situation, reportedly pleaded with him. He told Earl to breathe, to think about his family, to leave the apartment immediately. But Earl Hayes was already past the point of reason. While the connection was still active, Earl Hayes walked into the bathroom. Stephanie Moseley was taking a morning bath, a place where one should feel safe and vulnerable. The sanctuary of the home was breached. Stephanie never stood a chance. Earl fired multiple shots. Neighbors reported hearing a woman screaming, followed by the terrifying, sharp cracks of a handgun. And then, silence. On the other end of the phone, Floyd Mayweather became a helpless digital witness to a slaughter. He heard the shots. He heard the life being taken from a woman he knew. And then, he heard the final shot as Earl Hayes turned the gun on himself.
Vente lap swatiam arifet, ty triate te apartment as an actieve soete situation. Ty broke dovente door et pekting a standoff. Instead, ty found a tomb. Stepani Moseley was diat in te badtip. Earl Hayes was diat in te bedroom. Te glamour of ty rolly woord lieve had en dit in a blootbad te veel het by male insekuriteit. Te aftermate was a media frenzy. Tributus Pauret en fromstaarslike Rihanna antgrisproven. Bit beniate te grief was a daar conversation about te toetsigitei of control. Earl Hayes was so consumed by te idea of oefening his vivetat het dekkie dit haar lieve was les valuable tan his wounded pride. He veldend handle haar sitjes, ante veldend handle te touwget of haar witte anoterman. Te skase is a terrifying example of a familie annihilation in te celebrity word. Het forces is toe asko wel over reale knof te kouples we scroll past on social media. Tes liats met toe te gestion iemand uit te answer, Earl Hayes involvet a third partij, Floyd Mayweather, in his final moments via fascitime. Door uitdank technologie as made krimis of passion more performatieve. Dus te niet toe de broadcast our liefes actent even toe our darkest, most violent moments. Ivan Touriat our perspectieve on tes modern tragedie in te comments beloof. Stepani Moseley was killet by a husband who felt small in haar shadow. Bid in our netkase we enter te strange antgoties world of a music production liggend. We are going toe a kastle in Alhambra toe investigate te diate of an 80s bemovie actress wo met te man wo create te, wal of sound, onlei toe vind herself staring dovente barrel of agen. Subscribe and verify our notifications are on because if net, we investigate te bizarre diate of Lana Clarkson.
Number 5, Lana Clarkson. In the history of rock and roll, there are figures who are labeled geniuses. We forgive their eccentricities, their tempers, and their madness because they give us art that changes the world. Phil Spector was one of these men. He was the architect of the Wall of Sound, the producer behind the Beatles and the Righteous Brothers. But there is a fine line between a tortured genius and a dangerous monster. By the early 2000s, Spector had retreated into a bizarre world of isolation, living in a 33-room mansion in Alhambra, California, known as the Pyrenees Castle. It was a fortress of solitude where he kept his guns, his wigs, and his demons. On a cool night in February 2003, the gates of that castle opened for a woman looking for a nightcap, but what she found inside was a scene from a gothic horror movie. Our investigation focuses on Lana Clarkson. In the 1980s, Lana had been a cult icon, a stunning blonde Amazon who starred in B-movies like Barbarian Queen. She was strong, funny, and resilient. But Hollywood is unkind to women over 40. By 2003, the roles had dried up. Lana hadn't given up, though. She was working as a VIP hostess at the House of Blues on the Sunset Strip, making ends meet while waiting for her next break. On the night of February 3, 2003, Phil Spector walked into the House of Blues. He was treated like royalty. When he was leaving, he invited the beautiful hostess back to his castle for a drink. Lana reportedly hesitated. She didn't really know who he was, she viewed him as just another eccentric, wealthy patron. But eventually, perhaps out of politeness or curiosity, she agreed to go. She climbed into his limousine, unaware that she was being driven to her own execution. The events inside the Pyrenees castle in the early morning hours of February 4 are shrouded in alcohol and madness, but the ending is indisputable. Spector's chauffeur, Adriana de Souza, was waiting outside in the driveway. The castle was quiet. And then, at approximately 5 a.m., the silence was broken by a sound that is all too common in these stories, a single gunshot. Moments later, the back door of the castle swung open. Phil Spector emerged, holding a gun. According to the sworn testimony of the chauffeur, Spector looked at him with glazed eyes and uttered 5 chilling words, "I think I killed somebody." When police arrived, they found Lana Clarkson slumped in a chair in the foyer. She had been shot in the mouth with a .38 Colt Cobra revolver. Her teeth were scattered across the carpet. It was a grotesque, violent end for a woman who had spent her life entertaining others. But almost immediately, the narrative began to twist. Phil Spector, the man who had just confessed to his driver, changed his story. He told the police that Lana had done it to herself. He claimed she had kissed the gun. He painted a picture of a depressed, washed-up actress who committed accidental suicide in his home. It was a defense strategy designed to use Lana's fading career against her, to blame the victim for her own brutal death.
The legal battle dat volgewet was Assyrius. Spector hier het te best defense attorneys moenie sult by. Ty attack het Lana's karakter draging haar name trouge te met to safetet genees producer. Ty verstreel en dit in amistrial, te hiery was die loket. Het seemetlike weelte aanfame mig het onze agentip te skales of justice. Bitte prosecution had a trump card, historie. Women charme voorwaard from Spector's past, waitresses, girlfriends, assistants, al telling te same terrifying story. Ty testified dat Spector had a habit of locking doors aan pilling guns on women when ty treat to leave. It established a pattern. Lana Clarkson was in suicidal, sy was simpleite one woedend survive hesgame of Russian roulette. In 2009 sits eiers after te murder as se kon jy finale saf te trite. Paul Spector was convicted of second degree murder and sentenced to 19 eiers to liewe. Hy het in prison in 2021 Assad, Smalman Wose, Wal of Sound had been replaced by prison bars. Tiskase remains a painful reminder of how the legal system gaan bemanipulated to put the victim on trial. Lana Clarkson is often remembered Marilyn as te geroepel Spector shot, but sy was much more than a footnote in a murderer's biography. Sy was a working woman, a comedian, and a vechter who walked into a castle and never came out. Tis liats met toe te gestion iemand uit to answer, Spector's defense Lydya verlei on te idea dat because Lana was a strugling actress in haar 40s, sy mist halve been suicidal. Door uitdank society is to a kyk to believe negative stereotypes about women in the entertainment industry. Ivan Touriat oortuigits ontes in justice in te comments beloof. Lana Clarkson was killed by a liggend who believe hy was a god. Bid in our net kase betrafel to Europa to investigate a violent tragedy involving a beloved French actress and a famous rockstar. Het was aanbehating dat lasted voorhouders ignoreerd by tussen hierby, leiding toe akuma dat grip het aan nation. Subscribe aan vir die 5 uur notifications are on because it net we investigate te brutal diate of Marie Trintignant.
Number 6, Marie Trintignant. In the pantheon of European cinema, the Trintignant family is royalty. They are to France what the Barrymores are to Hollywood, a dynasty of talent, beauty, and artistic integrity. Marie Trintignant was the crown princess of this dynasty. The daughter of legendary actor Jean-Louis Trintignant, she was a celebrated actress in her own right, known for her deep, soulful performances and her fiercely independent spirit. But in the summer of 2003, her life became entangled with a man who embodied the dark, chaotic energy of rock and roll. Bertrand Cantat was the lead singer of Noir Désir, the biggest rock band in France. He was often called the Jim Morrison of France, charismatic, poetic, and politically outspoken. Together, Marie and Bertrand were a golden couple, the darlings of the French tabloids. They represented the perfect union of cinema and music, high art and raw rebellion. But beneath the magazine covers, their relationship was a powder keg of jealousy and alcohol. Our investigation takes us far from the lights of Paris to the cold, historic streets of Vilnius, Lithuania. Marie was there to shoot a movie, portraying the writer Colette, a role about a woman fighting for her independence. Ironically, and tragically, she was being pulled into a darkness that would strip her of her own. On the night of July 26, 2003, the couple returned to their hotel room at the Dominique Plaza after a night of drinking. What began as a celebration of art ended in a display of primal violence. The catalyst for the tragedy was painfully mundane, a text message. Marie received a friendly message from her ex-husband, the father of her child. For Bertrand Cantat, a man fueled by possessive rage and alcohol, this innocent communication was an act of treason. Inside that hotel room, the poet of rock became a butcher. The details revealed in the autopsy shattered the image of a lover's quarrel. Marie didn't just fall, she was systematically destroyed. Cantat struck her repeatedly, 19 blows to the head and face. The violence was so severe that it ruptured the nerves in her face and caused massive bleeding in her brain. But the physical assault was only the first part of the crime. The second part was the silence. After beating Marie into unconsciousness, Bertrand Cantat did not call an ambulance. He did not scream for help. Instead, he placed her broken body in the bed. He called Marie's brother, Vincent, who was also in Vilnius, and told him that they had argued and that Marie was sleeping it off. He downplayed the horror, manipulating the situation to buy time. For hours, Marie Trintignant lay dying in that hotel bed, her brain swelling, while the man who claimed to love her sat in the room, watching her life fade away. When medical help was finally summoned at 7:30 the next morning, it was too late. The golden window for saving her had closed. She had fallen into a deep coma from which she would never wake.
Marie was vlogen back to Paris on 'n private jet, uiteindelik geen returning home. Sy pas het away on August 1, 2003, surrounded by her devastated family. The nation of France went into mourning. Dit griefryk leiter net te vierry as die details of Cantat's actionskame toelig het. Die trial was held in Lithuania. Cantat Stevens treat to paint him as a victim of passion, a tortured artist who simply lost control during a mutual struggle. Hy treat to frame it as a tragic accident. Bitte autopsie spoke voor te diat, her en hieris weer consistent with a brutal, onesidet beating. Bertrand Cantat was convicted of manslaughter, a charge manifest was toelenient, and sentenced to eiget eiers in prison. Hy servet onlevou. Hy was released on parole in 2007 free to return to his missions and his life. His return to the stage sparked protests across France, with the feminists and fans of Marie's hunting and assassin outside his concerts. The stage forces is to confront the dangerhousemeite of the rock and roll bad boy. We often romantisize the volatiliteit of musicians, mistaking abuse for intensiteit. Tes liats met toe te gestion iemand auto answer, Bertrand kan dat servet onlei voor eiers voor beating af woman to diate underlying medical help. Upon his release, he attempted to restart his Mrs. career. Toe hou beliefe te publieks hult separate te art from te artist, or hult atschrimme of tes magnitude permanent lei end a publiek career. Ivan to riad eier verdekt ongansel tiltiere aan krimme in te comments beloof. Maar Trintignant was killet by a man wo valid is jalou sy oever herleffe. Bid in ouer net kase we investigate as story dat plaas outlike a telenovela gewone wrong. A famous Colombian actress, a controlling husband, aantal meisterious karkrase into a refer dat politische spijt was no accident. Subscribe aan verify our notifications are on because op net we investigate te suspicious diate of Adriana Campos.
Number 7, Adriana Campos. In the world of Latin American television, the telenovela is a cultural institution. These are stories defined by high passion, betrayal, and dramatic twists of fate. But sometimes, the scripts written for the screen pale in comparison to the tragedies written by life itself. Our next case involves a woman who was a queen of this genre. She was a beloved Colombian actress, known for her roles in hits like Vecinos and Bella Calamidades. She was beautiful, talented, and a mother. But her real-life romance was not a fairy tale, it was a turbulent drama that would end not with a wedding, but with a funeral. Our investigation takes us to the lush, mountainous region of Antioquia, Colombia, in November 2015. Adriana Campos was 36 years old. She had taken a step back from the intense lights of the studio to focus on raising her one-year-old son. She was at a crossroads in her life, specifically in her relationship with the father of her child, a businessman named Carlos Rinson. Their relationship was widely known to be volatile. They had separated multiple times, a cycle of breaking up and making up that exhausted those around them. Friends described Carlos as a man with a heavy foot and a controlling nature. In late 2015, they were in a period of attempted reconciliation. They decided to take a trip, a romantic getaway to smooth over the cracks in their marriage, leaving their infant son in the care of his grandmother. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it was a journey to the end of the line. The tragedy occurred in the early hours of November 3, 2015. The couple was driving back to Medellin after their weekend away. Carlos Rinson was behind the wheel of their luxury vehicle, Adriana was in the passenger seat. They were traveling through a sector known as La Munza, a road that winds dangerously alongside the powerful Cauca River. What happened next is a mixture of physics and mystery. According to the official police reconstruction, the car suddenly lost control. There were no skid marks suggesting a desperate attempt to brake to avoid an obstacle. The vehicle veered off the road, tumbled down a steep embankment, and plunged directly into the dark, rushing waters of the river. The impact was catastrophic, but the aftermath was silent. The car sank. Because it happened in the dead of night on a lonely stretch of highway, help did not arrive immediately. When fishermen and rescue workers finally located the vehicle, they found a heartbreaking scene. The car was submerged. Both Adriana and Carlos were dead inside. The official cause was ruled as microsleep, the theory that Carlos fell asleep at the wheel. However, in the days following the crash, darker theories began to circulate in the Colombian press. Sources close to the couple hinted at a heated argument before they got in the car. The lack of braking led some to speculate whether this was truly an accident, or a final, fatal act of a man who lost control of his temper while piloting a lethal weapon. Whether it was negligence, exhaustion, or rage, the result was the same. Adriana Campos had placed her life in her partner's hands, and he drove them both into the abyss.
The funeral of Adriana Campos was a national event in Colombia. Tausans mour net te los of te sterwe te brug het smiele. Bitte tree tragedie was found in the nurseryse left behind. Her one eier old son bekame aan Orpan in a single nugget, his parents taken by the Cauca River. Tis case surface as a grim reminder of the collateral damage of toxic relationships. Effene vir accepte theorie of an accident, it was an accident born of a childish attempt to fit something that was perhaps broken beyond repair. Het hegligits te simple danger of getting into a car with a partner when tensions are geantjegment is impaired. Tis liats methode gestion iemand auto answer, weil tis was officiële relate an accident die to sleepiness, maar hy believe dat turbulent emotions in a car are just as dangerous as alcohol. Door uithenke driving weile emotionele agitated, sal betriated wit het tesame severiteit as drinkdriving. Ivan Turiat uit perspektief ontes often overloke danger in te comments beloof. Adriana Campos dit in te passinger siat of haar huisband skaar. Wit en ouer net kase, wit rafal toeperuto investigate aan murderdaad was cold, calculated, and contracted. A legendary folklore singer found stabbed in haar appartement, and of 'n male partner wo alle gedleipaid a Hitman to selense hervoorrefer. Subscribe aan verify our notifications are on because it net we investigate the assassination of the princess of folklore, Alicia Delgado.
Number 8, Alicia Delgado. In the high Andes of Peru, folklore music is more than just entertainment, it is the heartbeat of the people. It tells stories of love, suffering, and the rugged beauty of the mountains. For decades, two women sat atop this musical throne. One was Alicia Delgado, known as La Princesa del Folklore, the Princess of Folklore. She was elegant, traditional, and beloved by millions. The other was Abencia Meza, known as the Queen of the Paranditas. She was brash, masculine, and known for her pistol-packing, hard-drinking persona. To the public, they were rivals on stage. But behind the curtain, they were locked in a turbulent, passionate, and often violent romantic relationship that spanned nearly a decade. It was a love story that defied the conservative norms of their culture, but it was poisoned by a toxicity that would eventually turn lethal. Our investigation takes us to Lima, Peru, in June 2009. Alicia Delgado was 50 years old. She was an icon, wealthy and successful, but she lived in fear. In the months leading up to her death, the relationship with Abencia had disintegrated into a nightmare of jealousy and physical abuse. Alicia had publicly separated from Abencia, and in a chilling foreshadowing of her own fate, she had gone to the police. She recorded a video statement, declaring that if anything were to happen to her, the blame should fall squarely on one person, Abencia Meza. Alicia was trying to break free from a possessive grip, unaware that her partner had already allegedly set a plan in motion to ensure she would never be free again. The silence of Alicia's apartment in the Santiago de Surco district was broken on June 25, 2009. When police entered the residence, they found the Princess of Folklore lying face down in her bedroom. The scene was brutal. She had been stabbed 9 times and strangled with a leather strap. It was an overkill that suggested deep, personal rage. Initially, detectives looked for a robbery gone wrong. But the brutality of the crime pointed to something more intimate. The breakthrough came quickly. Police arrested a man named Pedro Cesar Mamancura, Alicia's former driver and bodyguard. Under interrogation, the facade crumbled. Mamancura confessed to the killing, but he dropped a bombshell that shook the entire nation. He claimed he wasn't acting alone. He stated that he had been hired to do the job. The person who paid him? Alicia's former lover, Abencia Meza. According to the investigation, Abencia, consumed by jealousy and the fear of Alicia exposing her secrets, had ordered the hit. It was a cold-blooded contract, killed a woman she claimed to love to stop her from leaving. The Queen of Paranditas had allegedly tried to orchestrate the perfect crime, using a pawn to execute her queen.
Dit trial was de Peruvian equivalent of de O.J. Simpson kase. Het was televisie daily, gripping te nation witte its match of celebriteit, secret romance, and betrayal. Abencia Meza maintained haar innocence, weeping in fout and crying out for haar lost love. With the evidence, the video Alicia left behind, the phone records, and the Hitman's testimony pointed at different papieren. In 2012, the court delivered its verdict. Abentia Mesa was found geilty of bainte intellectual autor of the murder and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Ter Kien was dit ronet and sent to a cell while the princess was buried as a martyr of domestic violence. This case is particularly chilling because it wasn't a shimmer of sudden passion, it was a premeditated execution. It forces us to look at the different dynamics of domestic homicide. Usually we see the bicycle committed by the partner. Here the partner is het moenie and influence to have sommige else strikke te blof. Tis liats met toe te gestion iemand uit te answer, te love of ten treedste intellectual autor te persoon wo hier is te Hitman, wat het same severity as te actual killer. Doe hou agree wat het is. Doe uithenk te persoon wo orders te diate is even moore geldheid aan te one wo hotste kniefe. Ivan Turiat eier verdekt onmoral responsibiliteit in te comments beloof. Alicia Delgado was silenset by a jaloos lover wo hy red an assassin. Bid in our net kase we jump to te presentai. We enter the digital world of TikTok, weer a eung motors haar het haar leffe witte thousands of followers in a ware taat haar final video wild bete prelede toe a gruisome liefestriam of horror. Subscribe and verify our notifications are on because it net we investigate the shocking murder of Marilyn Martinez.
Number 9, Marilyn Martinez. In the digital age, we have created a new kind of celebrity. It doesn't require a Hollywood agent or a record deal, it only requires a smartphone and a smile. Marilyn Martinez was a star of this new world. A young mother living in Lima, Peru, she had built a massive following on TikTok. Her videos were full of life, dance trends, fitness routines, and joyful moments with her husband and young son. To her thousands of followers, she lived a charmed life. She was the picture of modern happiness. But the camera lens is a filter, not a window. It shows us what the creator wants us to see, hiding the bruises, both physical and emotional, that exist just out of frame. Behind the upbeat music and the viral choreography, Marilyn was living in a state of constant siege. Her husband, Alexander Hernandez, often appeared in her videos. On screen, he played the role of the loving partner. But in reality, he was a man consumed by a corrosive, old-world jealousy. As Marilyn's fame grew, so did Alexander's rage. He didn't see her followers as fans, he saw them as rivals. He read every comment, obsessing over the compliments she received. He began to control her content, dictating what she could wear and how she could move. He viewed her digital success not as a victory for their family, but as a personal threat to his masculinity. Marilyn was thriving, but in the shadows of their apartment, Alexander was sharpening his resentment. The illusion of the happy family shattered on January 16, 2023. It was a Monday afternoon in the quiet district of San Borja. Inside their apartment, the camera was off, and the terrifying reality of their marriage took center stage. Neighbors reported hearing terrified screams coming from the unit. When the police forced their way in, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. Marilyn Martinez, the woman who had brought joy to so many screens, was found dead in her bedroom. She had been stabbed 30 times with a kitchen knife. The brutality of the attack indicated a frenzy of hatred. It wasn't just a murder, it was an attempt to destroy the very beauty that Alexander felt he was losing control over. But the most heartbreaking detail of this crime wasn't the weapon or the wounds. It was the witness. The couple's young son was in the apartment when his mother was butchered. He was found physically unharmed but psychologically shattered, locked in a room while his father executed his mother. Alexander Hernandez was arrested at the scene. He reportedly confessed to the police with chilling calmness, citing his jealousy over her TikTok videos as the justification for his savagery. He had decided that if he couldn't control who looked at her, he would make sure no one ever saw her again.
The murder of Marilyn Martinez sent a shock waar vertrouwde te social media community. Fans wou het wat het haar danse juist bevore weer een noveliaving tributus on haar memorial page. Haar final videos bekame hunting artifacts, klies dat weer een misset, smille stad het vier. It sparked a fierce debate across Latin America about the dangerous content creators fase, not from stalkers online, but from the insecure partners sleeping beside them. Alexander Hernandez was charged with the femicide. He stands as a grim example of a modern predator, a man who smilet voor te selfie bid held te knieven in his otterhand. The Stase forces is to confront the dark side of their creator economy. For man and women, financial independence trouwige social media is a path to freedom, but for their abusive partners, it is a loss of control. Tes liats met toe te gestion iemand uit te answer, social media alofs is to see into people's lives, but we often miss the signs of abuse. Door uithank platforms like TikTok and Instagram sal to more to provide resources for creators wo mig het beindanger or is te safety of what happens offline entirely out of their hands. Ivan to read our perspectieve on tes digital tragedy in te comments beloof. Marilyn Martinez was killed because sy sone toe brugtlei for a small man. Bid in our final classe, we travel to the world of classical messages. We investigate te diate of a liggend wo se voice definite a generation killed in a sede motel in der circumstances that remain one of the greatest mysteries in missive history. Subscribe and verify our notifications are on because it net we investigate the controversial diate of some Cooke.
Number 10, Sam Cooke. We end our journey with a case that remains an open wound in the history of music. Sam Cooke was not just a singer, he was the king of soul. He was a man who possessed a voice that could heal a divided nation, the architect of the civil rights anthem, "A Change Is Gonna Come." He was handsome, wealthy, and on the verge of becoming a cultural revolutionary. But on a cold night in December 1964, the voice of a generation was silenced, not in a concert hall, but in the office of a cheap, $3-a-night motel in South Los Angeles. The official story is ugly and simple. The whispers and theories that have persisted for 60 years are far more complex. It was December 11, 1964. Sam Cooke was dining at a swanky Hollywood restaurant, Martoni's, with friends. He was seen leaving with a striking young woman named Alicia Boyer. According to the narrative that was presented to the world, they drove to the Hacienda Motel. It was a place known for short stays and secrets. Alicia Boyer would later claim that she had been kidnapped, that she was afraid Cooke was going to assault her. She claimed she escaped the room with her clothes, and curiously, with Sam's clothes as well, leaving the superstar half-naked and furious. But those who knew Sam Cooke never accepted this version of the man. They saw him as a gentleman, a star who had the world at his feet and no need to force himself on anyone. What happened next is a blur of violence that changed music history forever. At around 3 a.m., a rage-filled Sam Cooke, wearing only a sport coat and shoes, banged on the door of the motel manager's office. The manager was a woman named Bertha Franklin. She was tough, terrified, and armed. According to Bertha, Sam demanded to know where the girl was. He broke down the door. A struggle ensued. In the chaos of that small office, Bertha Franklin grabbed a .22 caliber pistol. She fired 3 shots. One pierced Sam Cooke's heart. When the police arrived, they found the man who sang, "You Send Me," dead on the floor. The "King of Soul" had been reduced to a police statistic. The authorities quickly ruled it a justifiable homicide, accepting the story of the manager and the fleeing woman without deep scrutiny. The case was closed in a matter of days. But the silence didn't last. At his funeral, Etta James reportedly viewed his body and saw injuries that didn't match the story of a simple struggle. She claimed his head was practically separated from his shoulders and his hands were broken. Rumors exploded. Was this a setup? Was Alicia Boyer a decoy used to lure him to his death to rob him of his royalties? Was it a racially motivated assassination to silence a powerful black man rising in a white industry?
60 years later, te diate of some Cooke remains a jeugdsaf puzzle with the missing pieces. Bertha Franklin van is het into obscurity. Elisa Boer was later convicted of second-degree murder in an unrelated case involving a boyfriend, casting a long shadow over her credibility at night at the motel. We are left with the tragedy of a genees wo se life ended in a scenario in word hy of his legatij. Whether it was a shame of passion, a robbery gewone wrong, or a sonspirasy, the result is tesame, the musiek stop het by toesoon. Tes Lyads methode final gestion of ouer dokumentary, gevente inconsistencies aan te swift closing of the case, do ou believe some choke was the victim of a setup, or was this truly a tragic series of bad decisions that led to a fatal end. Ivan Touriat ouer theories on tes ultimate meisterij in te comments beloof. From the hills of Hollywood to the motels of Los Angeles, we have seen that fame is no armor against the violence of the heart. Deze ten men and women conquered the world with their talent, but they felt not survive to be able closest to them. If you found this investigation compelling, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We are dedicated to ensuring the dark history behind the legends ou lofe. Im te case valt, and illusie hou internet investigation.